that's a lot. It's a lot of good, right? Yeah. I'm Evelyn Holmes from Channel 7. I know everybody watches Channel 7 in here, so that's okay. We don't have to, we can dispense with all of that. But this isn't about me. This is about what we just saw. I am just blown away. Nancy, girl. Man. Wow. I mean, I'm sorry, you gotta stand up. We gotta celebrate you. Come on. Come on. Gotta do it. Gotta do it. She's modest. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna try to kind of take all this in at the same time. And then we're gonna talk about it. We're gonna have this panel here. Let me introduce them. We'll have a few questions. And then we'll have Tori, Crystal, you guys around? There you are. Woo-hoo. We'll have them with microphones. And if you all have any questions that come up, I want y'all to ask them, okay? I'm used to asking the questions, but today, I'm gonna listen and learn. Let's introduce who we have here. And is this too casual for you all? I feel like we're kind of family, you know what I mean? I mean, we may not be at the church or the synagogue or the mosque, but you know what? We're still family, because we came here to celebrate each other and to celebrate our knowledge and our understanding, because this is a safe space where we can have these really great conversations, right? Okay. So, on our stage tonight, should I do my reporter voice? I'm just kidding, I'm not gonna do that. My daughters say I always have that, I'm like, I don't think so. The executive producer of the film, Nancy Armstrong. Girl, I love it. No, you can tell when folks been through something, because they know other people who've been through something, and they know how to share it. Beautiful. Fantastic. Dr. Nancy Burgoyne, she is the Chief Clinical Officer with the Family Institute at Northwestern University. Nancy, did you raise your hand? Do you know who you are? Dr. Smita Gautam, did I pronounce that right? Say it again, say it right, say it right. There, that's what I was about to say. She is the child, thank you for the laughter, because I only tell bad jokes, that's all I got for you. She is a child and adolescent psychiatrist with the Family Institute at Northwestern University. Huh? And last but not least, Dr. Tramaine Presley, who is Director of Child, Adolescent, and Family Services at the Family Institute at Northwestern University. Okay. Now, I'm going to have you all, you got your programs right, a lot of information about these very learned and talented individuals. I'm going to let you all read that later on if you wish. I'm not going to bore you with all the wonderful details. You can read that at your leisure. And then we did mention, right, that Crystal and Tori eventually are going to be available to ask questions, but we got a few questions just to start, okay? Done the ball roll and get everybody comfortable, so you know, you'll have a chance to talk. Now, the only thing I'd ask is that, because I'm sure we have a lot of questions and a lot of people have a lot to say or questions to ask and want some information, let's keep our questions succinct. Let's keep to the point. And then our wonderfully informed panel will share what they have to share, and that way we can get as many questions in as possible. Okay? Deal? Okay, fantastic. I didn't think of that, but I'll take credit for it. See, you're laughing. This is good. This is good. You didn't think I was just charming, did you? You know, when you're standing there talking about, you know, whatever, horrible things. People don't think you're charming, but I actually am. Just ask me. Anyway, Nancy, girl. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just That's a little joke.
I love it.
Yes. You know, I'm going to tell you, I was mesmerized by the work. Talk a little bit about why you felt the need to create the film.
Yeah, so I raised 3 children with ADHD, still raising them. And we had the same journey that you see with so many of the parents in the film. And there was no film on ADHD, which I always found bewildering. So our journey, just to give you a little idea, my son was the first one that was diagnosed, but we knew early on something was going on. He and I were kicked out of Mommy and Me class when he was a toddler, too disruptive. And by the time he was 4, I remember he was eating sand off the back of these tires, like sort of perpetually eating sand. So we took him to Yale New Haven Children's Hospital, and the doctor comes in, and I'm with my dad, who was born in 1926, and my son is bouncing off the walls, and the doctor says, well, clearly your son is at war with you. And my dad from 1926 is like, mm-hmm. And I knew that was ridiculous, so I got really no help from Yale New Haven Children's Hospital. So then he was diagnosed with sensory integration disorder, which is really just a symptom of ADHD. And then it wasn't until he was 8 years old, after I had sent him to a psychologist, and the psychologist said, I want you to have him tested. And I said, for what? And he wouldn't tell me. So we took him, he went through all these tests, and my husband and I are in the room, and he said, your son has ADHD, and he's in the 96th percentile of hyperactivity. So he's rambling down the list of all the symptoms of ADHD, and next to me, my husband is sort of slouching down in his chair, and the hand is going up. And I said, what now? And he said, I have all those symptoms. And the doctor said, well, it's hereditary. So that was kind of the beginning of our journey. And with my 2 daughters, we kind of missed their diagnosis because girls present so differently than boys, as you saw in the film. But as soon as they reached middle school, things just started to fall apart precipitously. I mean, a steep decline, and I guess it's the combination of the puberty hormones and the demands of middle school. So you go from 1 teacher to 6 teachers, 1 binder to 6 binders. And so we had to have them evaluated, and sure enough, they also had ADHD. So it runs in our family, and I needed a film, particularly those middle school years where it's the combination of ADHD and puberty is like Armageddon in a house. And so I just wanted a film that parents could see themselves and children could see themselves in a hopeful light. They would see their struggle and also see the hope, which we don't really have, even though Driven to Distraction was written by Ned Hallowell, and it's been out since 1994. It's still not a pervasive point of view, and we have a deep misunderstanding of ADHD as a society still. Even when people understand it, they doubt it. They doubt it's real. Is it real, or is it just willfulness? Is it laziness? Is it, lack of motivation? So I feel like this film will cut through all of that. That's my hope. And that we can start having a different conversation and have a conversation, because in the 20 years I was raising kids, no conversation in public like this. And we need to have this conversation, so.
Fantastic. I mean, I think you made a lot of great points about that, and just the fact that that one thing that struck me was the level of misunderstanding, the level of judgment that's attached, right, in a negative way. So even if you're trying to seek out information from people who are supposed to be learned enough to make those assessments, there's a level of judgment attached to that too. So it's like you're trying to swim through quicksand, right? Dr. Nancy, the one thing I noticed about this movie, and some of the things is like what people want to know, do X, Y, Z, whatever. And I know my kids sometimes will ask me, well, what does that look like? Because a lot of times you can tell somebody something, but until they see it and they know what it looks like, it doesn't resonate. There were a lot of kind of examples of how this presents, right? Talk about your experience, how it kind of presents, and then how it looks if there's not an acknowledgement that that's what it is ADHD.
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. I think the film did an amazing job, and Nancy, we are honored as the Family Institute to be part of this conversation and to participate in promoting knowledge about this, because it is genuinely heartbreaking. And I thought the film did an amazing job, actually, of portraying the impact on families. You know, there's a very, very old book written about ADHD, and I'm darned if I can remember the author's name, and the title was, "No, I'm Not Lazy, Crazy, or Stupid," right? And that sort of impact, that sort of felt experience of something being desperately wrong and being blamed for it, and it being poorly misunderstood, that impacts the entire family. And everybody is trying to adjust to it, and everybody is feeling overwhelmed by it, and every transition is difficult. Every interaction becomes loaded with meaning because kids aren't succeeding in the settings where they're supposed to succeed. So if you think about the combination of ADHD and school and the expectations for succeeding in that context, it's a terrible fit. And that's the place where you start to feel your sense of yourself outside of your home, if you're okay, if you're going to make it, if you're going to be all right. So I think it's a profound and devastating impact when it's poorly understood and poorly treated.
You know, another thing that I noticed, and maybe you all noticed too, was, Nancy, I'm going to tell you, the one thing I loved about what you did was you didn't just show how ADHD looks with different kids, presents itself, you know, girls, boys, different ages. But what you did was you looked at it from a household perspective as well. So you had, you know, older kids, younger kids, kids with two parents in the household, kids with one parent, single parent, kids of color, kids who were not of color. I love that, and that kind of leads me to the next question for Dr. Tramaine. Talk to me about this issue with how this may affect community of color, because there are stigmas that are attached in communities of color with mental health, and sometimes stigmas of seeking medical attention for certain things like that. How does that play out with diagnosis? How does it play out with treatment? Are there differences in what you're seeing?
Absolutely. When it comes to communities, Black and brown communities, children are at a disproportionate rate being misdiagnosed. They're often diagnosed with more behavioral issues. This leads to increased rates, disproportionate rates in the juvenile justice system. Very similar to what we saw in the film. They are overpunished in school versus being referred for evaluation or treatment. And really, it's the cultural bias coupled with racial bias in healthcare by healthcare professionals that really leads to misdiagnoses. In addition to cultural mistrust in the healthcare system, right? Parents' lack of education or understanding about the disorder itself, awareness of the symptoms associated with the disorder. And so they're not seeking the help, right? Really nervous or anxious about seeking help because of this cultural and racial bias that exists in the healthcare system. And so what we really want to do is increase representation in the healthcare system, right? Making sure that we are providing culturally sensitive services to our Black and brown communities, providing psychoeducation where needed, so that we can try to reduce those rates.
And also, Nancy, when you put this together, I love the fact that you addressed also the cost. What about folks that don't have health insurance, or gig workers, right? Or people who are just trying to recover from the pandemic. I mean, a lot of those jobs that people worked, they're gone. Those industries have changed. I know my industry has changed a lot as a result. So these are things that impact, as you're mentioning, how people are trying to deal. And that kind of leads me to my next question. Dr. Smita, I don't know about you, and I don't know about y'all, but a lot of times I'm just stressed. Does anybody in here else feel stressed? I mean, sometimes you just stressed for you don't even know why you stressed. You're just stressed. It's been a tough 3 years, right? It's been, and it might be another tough 3 we got coming, right? That leads me to this issue of anxiety. I know I've developed, we work on deadline a lot. You're under constant pressure to get it done. There's no such thing as failure and not getting it right. So I deal with anxiety all the time, and I'm sure a lot of you do too. Talk to me a little bit about how anxiety kind of plays into this whole mix of ADHD. Is there a linkage there? Does one exacerbate the other?
Sure. So when we talk about anxiety and ADHD, I want to tell you about three sort of different linkages. One is anxiety as a consequence of ADHD. Two, anxiety masquerading as ADHD. And three, anxiety in addition to ADHD. And all those three are there when I see kids and adults in my practice. What's important the way to differentiate would be to look at the onset of symptoms and also the context of symptoms. And that's why it's important to go to the right professional and get the clarity on it. If both coexist as independent entities, where to start treatment first can be a big question. And again, the context matters, the severity of each one matters, the onset of symptoms matters. Whether or not, if they are independent or not, they tend to make each other worse. There are a couple symptoms that overlap in both anxiety and ADHD. Inattention, restlessness are the symptoms that go side by side and together. And what can happen is when you are anxious, you are worried about things. ADHD makes it really hard to think about so many other things to worry about. The curiosity and worrying just amplifies anxiety. If you have ADHD and also anxiety, especially if it's severe, procrastination is another symptom that can be in both anxiety as well, anxiety disorders and ADHD, and there you go. Procrastination gets worse and worse. Avoidance is another symptom that's there in both. And both, each illness or each disorder tends to worsen another one.
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting to me because it seems like, it's really important that the signs be properly diagnosed and assessed, and that there be a level of honesty, not just from whoever is experiencing it, but also from the parents. The one thing I love about the parents is the parents had to get real and say, you know what? My kid got this from me, or that's something I see, like you were saying, husband shrank down and said, that resembles me a little, that kind of thing. It's really, really important. So I appreciate you sharing that. I think it's time, we're gonna open up for audience questions, but let me tell you guys this, I think it's really exciting. This is being recorded, the panel discussion. So if there's anything like you think you missed, or you're like, oh, let me roll that back, they're gonna get a recording for you, send it to your email, and you'll be able to play it and look at me all you'd like. I'm just kidding. You don't have to look at me. You can if you like. I'm gonna stand right here. No, I'm just kidding, I'm not gonna do that. So ladies there, Crystal and Tori have microphones. Just kind of raise your hand. They'll pop over. They'll hold the mic for you. This is a full service panel, by the way. So who do we have? We've got one here. We've got one there. Why don't we go? Stand on up. Don't be shy.
Oh, thank you. Hi. Loved the movie. It was very thought-provoking. I am a social worker, so one of the things that really struck me from the film was how the school system really played into the worsening of symptoms and shame. So my brain goes to what policy changes or structural changes can be made at the school and educational level to help support patients, clients, and their families.
Can I just ask a question? How many teachers do we have here? Okay. And how many, now I just have to know, how many parents of kids with ADHD? Okay, how many people who actually on their own have ADHD? I think it might be more than that because all those parents who have kids Just saying. So I'll just throw in my 2 cents on the schools, having gone through it 3 times. The schools don't have enough education. Administrators don't have enough education. They have a general idea about ADHD, but it's very superficial. It's kind of, they're hyperactive. You know, they get the superficial manifestation of ADHD, hyperactivity, impulsivity, distractibility, but they don't know why it's happening. And I think they're still questioning of like, is this really, you know, couldn't they just stop? No. You know, so kids are getting blamed in schools for something that's neurological. So that there's that lack of education. I think that's point number 1. And there's also training that they can do in schools that can really help kids with ADHD. And, you know, there's many things, but just like putting them in the front of the classroom, it's the relationship with the student. That's huge. If the kids pick up on it, if a teacher gives up on the kid or rolls their eyes or thinks the kid is a pain in the neck, and that's their attitude towards the student, that student will give up. There's no hope anymore. And you know, I one Spanish teacher, and I think it was freshman year in high school for my son, he would say, "Juan, I know you can do it." Like, you know, he gave him the Spanish name Juan, and it was his belief in him and his pushing him to, you know, to fulfill his potential, that my son would say, I have to study because he's so nice to me, he believes in me, you know. So he was motivated because this teacher had a relationship with him. And so little things like that, also just when kids are small, doing smaller amounts of work at one time. So if there's 30 problems, do 10 and then have them come up and look at them and then do another 10. It's that 30 problems is so overwhelming. So there's little strategies like that can be implemented that some teachers do. There are some amazing teachers, but the vast majority of teachers, I think, need more training and more strategies.
Did either one of you ladies want to address that, and then throw in there, listen, I'm gonna put a little accent on what she said. Talk about, because that's a great question, talk about how, what Nancy's referring to, IEPs and 504s, because my youngest has a IEP, I mean, that requires certain things. Is that afford any kind of protection or any greater access? I mean, the guardrails, talk a little bit about that, because I'm sure some parents in here, you got kids that have had 504s or IEP, and you're doing that in order to protect them, in order to make sure they get the proper services that they need. And the approach, so they're in the front of the classroom, you know, they get a little extra time, that kind of thing.
So I was, at the beginning of this event, I was asked, is this your area of expertise? And I said, I kind of just fell into it because I work primarily with children, adolescents, and families. And so in my work with children, the approach is very systemically, which often means that I have to include parents and teachers and families and school staff, all part of the treatment team. Treatment is not effective because you have to think about it. A child is spending majority of their day, 5 days a week, at the school with the school staff and teacher. So it's so imperative that we include parents or teachers and school staff as part of that treatment team, but also building school-home collaboration. It's really about educating, as Nancy mentioned. A lot of teachers don't really understand ADHD, so, and especially because it manifests so differently from person to person. So really my goal and my aim when I'm working with these teachers and school staff is to help them understand ADHD as the disorder as it manifests for that particular child. And so it's really trying to figure out what's going on in the classroom that's disrupting their ability to perform academically well. And so we want to be able to target interventions to target those symptoms. In addition to that, it is participating in the creation of a 504 and IEP, Individual Education Plan. And so clinicians working with the school staff have the ability, as invited by the parent, to sit in on those case conference meetings to make sure that the student is getting the accommodations necessary that will target the symptoms displayed in school. In addition to that, as the child gets older, having that 504 plan or the IEP put in place allows for those accommodations to follow them throughout their whole school career, even throughout college. It really, I mean, each time the child has a case conference, those accommodations can be updated because, you know, developmentally things change, and we want to make sure that those accommodations are up to date to meet the child with where they're at with what they need. So it's imperative that I think clinicians take this approach, this treatment approach, systemically, and reaching out to schools and getting them also involved.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Another question here, right? We got one there, we got one here. So, Tori, you gonna, okay. You can stand if you'd like. We'd like to see you. Stand up so they can see you. It's okay. We love you.
My question's about the family and the siblings, because like I have a son who has ADHD. He went to like 6 schools in 5 years, and he was the youngest of 3. And it definitely had a lot of repercussions on the whole family, like his sister is always saying, everyone ignored me because everyone paid attention to him. He also got labeled as like the troublemaker with the siblings. So I guess I'm asking the therapist part of you guys up there, like what? I don't know. It's hard to get siblings into family therapy because like a lot of times it's not their problem, it's someone else's. So just wondering your thoughts on how to improve like parents talking to the other siblings about what's going on with the child who has ADHD.
I love that you asked this question because you're pointing out some of the dynamics that get set in motion whenever there's a significant health problem for any family member. It sets in motion very specific dynamics in the family with the other siblings. Some overcompensate and they become these super overachievers. Some shrink back. Lots of different things happen. Family therapy can be incredibly helpful, but you're right. Sometimes you can't always get everybody engaged. But a creative therapist can work with the parents and coach you on how to have those kinds of conversations or meet with, in systemic language, we'd say subsystems, right? To sort of convene you and one of your kids at a time, for example. So you don't have to sign on to whole family therapy in order to get help as a family. You can come in and we can work, and other folks too can work with different dyads and triads in the system to help you work through some of those issues. And it can be incredibly helpful and incredibly meaningful in the long run. So I just love that question. Great question.
Okay, who else had a question? We got right there, and we got someone over here. Well, we get somebody in the queue over here, and then you all, that's okay. Go ahead and ask your question here, and then we get somebody, whoever's next, just stand up and we put you in the queue. Go right ahead.
I'm a parent of an adult with ADHD. She's almost 24. About 8 years ago is when she was diagnosed. My question is kind of on the IHP side and also on the Family Institute side. You mentioned following the children through when they go to college. Well, she didn't get that opportunity. So what does she have available to her now?
So she can still get evaluated. So, you know, I think what I've seen in my own practice is that, you know, a lot of times they didn't get evaluated, you know, during high school, middle school. And so what we're seeing is that they come in, they get the evaluation, they identify accommodations that would be appropriate, and she can actually take the evaluation to the Office of Disability Services that's located at the campus, and then they can provide her accommodations.
Hang on 1 second. Let her get the mic so we can all hear you. Go ahead.
Like a follow-up to that is because she is over 18. As soon as she turned 18, I had nothing to say about anything anymore. I couldn't go and seek out these opportunities for her. She had to go do them herself. She's not capable of doing that herself.
In my practice, I've seen parents accompany their child to the Office of Disability Services at the actual college campus, helping the child calling and scheduling, making an appointment. So I think, again, the child is going to need that assistance from the parent to some degree because they may not feel motivated or are unable to initiate that process by themselves.
That's a great question. You wanted to add?
Always ask your daughter to ask their psychiatrist or psychologist if you could join one of the sessions for 15-20 minutes. We always welcome that. Via Zoom, via phone, I have done this several times, where I'll have a parent join over phone or join over Zoom, and give the childhood history, because some of the young adults may not even remember how things were when they were younger.
Thank you. Go right ahead.
Hi. So earlier you were asking people like what category, did they fall under? And I also think that there's a population of undiagnosed ADHD. And I would have to say, I think like in my case, I was undiagnosed only because like I grew up, my grandmother was a minister and everything was God's gonna take care of it. Well, I needed God when I was sitting in class, okay? But here's my question to Nancy. Nancy, how did you get the participants for the film? The families as well as the...
How do we choose them?
Yeah, how did they come up?
So we just went around the country to places like the Family Institute and had them put an email out to members that they served if anyone would be interested in being in this film. And Ned Hallowell knew the coach, Kristen Seymour, who we said, Kristen, can you pick out one of your, can you get one of your clients to say, to be in the film? And we also knew who we wanted. We wanted a middle school boy, a middle school girl. We wanted it to be diverse. We wanted an adult female. Oh, there you are. We wanted an adult female. So we wanted to sort of capture the fact that it's not boys, it's not girls, it's not little kids, and the numbers are going up because there have been these undiagnosed segments of the population, like girls, teenagers, adults, women in particular. So, people are always concerned that the numbers are going up and that we're overdiagnosing. We aren't, as Russell Barkley said, it's just that those segments of the population that were underdiagnosed, we are now identifying better than we did before. For example, we missed you, So, I think just even watching the film, I just went to a homecoming game at my daughter's school, which was also my school, and someone that I knew in college came up to me and said she watched the film and she realized that that was what she was struggling with her whole life, and she went to a doctor and got diagnosed and started getting treated, and her whole mind is completely blown and it's changing her life. So sometimes, it's the power of film just to be something we can consume all together. You can't give someone a 500-page book and say, read this book. I mean, maybe you can, but people with ADHD have a hard time reading long books. So the film, I tried to make the film short too, because I'm like, no one's going to have the attention span to watch this film. So anyway.
I think it worked just fine. It was riveting. It really was. I'm not trying to be funny. It really was. We've got one right there, and we've got one here.
Hi, I'm a parent of someone with ADHD. And I'm wondering, you just talked about the power of the film, and I'm wondering two short things. One, do you have a particular plan to make the film available, particularly to schools? And then two, there were a number, you mentioned Dr. Hollowell and some of the other doctors, and they are authors of books. Is there somewhere to find the resources that were mentioned in the film, to find those resources? Thanks.
So thanks for the question. All the resources that are at disruptorsfilm.com. We have a resources page. What was the other question? So the film is available online now, iTunes, Apple TV, YouTube, Google Play, Amazon, and Vudu. But we are also, I also have a company, Rocco Films, that is making the film available in universities and schools, and a special impact program that I am funding myself, that is for schools that wouldn't be able to necessarily afford paying for the film. So in all of those schools, if they want the film, they can have it free of charge to show it to their parent body, to their administrators and teachers.
Fantastic.
Yes, that availability to do a community screening in a school, that's also at disruptorsfilm.com.
Okay. We had another, thank you, that was a great question. We have a question here, right? Is there someone else? Oh, I saw a hand over here somewhere. Maybe not, I was seeing things, okay.
So I have ADHD, and as an adult who has a job, I find that there's no resources or kind of flexibility whatsoever in a workplace that's very regimented and also very, like, so for example, working spaces that are not, when you're don't have a private office is very difficult. Is there increased awareness? Is there protections legally for people who have ADHD in workplaces? And do you know of anything that might be available?
If you go to Americans with Disabilities Act website and Google it, some of it will come up. And I think after this screening, we are going to send out resources as well for people who have had registered. So there is a website, the name doesn't come to me, where you can get templates of what to ask for, what's considered a reasonable accommodation, and for different jobs, they give you different templates. Keep in mind, sometimes not all workplaces are friendly for people with disabilities, visible or invisible. So you have to tread that path carefully.
Any other questions? We got one there. All right.
Hi. No one told me that I needed Kleenex for this movie. I was bawling the entire time, but for good reason. I have, in about 2 weeks, he'll be 6 years old, and he's being reevaluated for ADHD. About 2 years ago, we got him evaluated, and he was diagnosed with separation anxiety and then undiagnosed neuropsychological disorder. I think that's what it was. So we've been watching him. And we are kind of at this point projecting that he is going to have the diagnosis of ADHD, and that's why we came tonight. While he's obviously my first concern, and I will do whatever it takes to get him figured out, I feel like a crappy parent, and that I'm a failure, and I yell at him all the time, and that's why I was watching.
You're not a failure.
Well, deep down inside, I know I'm an awesome parent,
Listen,
and I'm like the coolest person in the
what,
world.
I'm just gonna say, you're not.
Thank you.
You're not. You're not. You're human, and you're trying,
right,
and you're advocating, and you're fighting for your kid.
Right. And I think, obviously, not obviously, but I go to therapy. We go to therapy. But what else can I do? I don't know enough. I don't know where to start. I don't know how I can work on it on my end to be able to help him. Because right now I just scream, and that's not working.
Ideas?
Yeah. I'll say a couple things, and then I'm guessing, Nancy, you'll probably want to add. There's a really great advocacy organization called CHADD, CHADD, and they have abundant resources for folks who have ADHD and for parents, educational resources, advocacy resources, and they create some community because I think it's incredibly isolating. It's a phenomenally difficult job to parent these kids, and so you're doing heroic work, and you're going to need people around you who get it and who can have your back and tell you when you have your own meltdown that you're not a bad person, you're just a parent who's trying to figure it out. Yeah, so I would encourage you to Google that, and I'm sure you want to add because you
Nancy?
have direct experience.
You want to add something?
Yeah, parental guilt is a huge issue with parents who are raising children with ADHD. So you saw a lot of that in the film. It was all over the place. And it's very common, and you have to give yourself a break and start fresh every day. I can't tell you how many times my husband and I have screwed up in the raising 3 kids with ADHD department. But kids with ADHD are very resilient, and they have super big hearts, and they're very forgiving. And so, when I ask my son, I have boy, girl, girl in that order. And certainly my son, it was impossible not to scream. I mean, he was, the answer to everything was no. And it was a shit show in our house every single day, 24 hours a day, 365. So, you know, you're only human and you have to give yourself a break. But here are some tips I learned along the way. Number one, hug your children constantly, even when, and especially when they're behaving badly. Sometimes I just, now after so many years, I'll just stroll up to my 17-year-old who is spewing all of this stuff at me, and I'll just wrap my arms around her and say, I love you so much. And she's totally disarmed. It's like a magic trick. It works every time. They just want, they feel bad about themselves, they're lashing out, and as they're lashing out, they feel bad, or whatever they've done, they feel terrible. So that's number one. Hug your kids constantly, and most especially when they are unhuggable. And then two is try to disassociate when things are going badly, like cut the mother cord. So, you know, for example, when I'm driving my daughter to school, sometimes I still do, she can drive, but she's just going crazy on me in the car on the way to school. And now I say, oh, I don't know her that well. I was hired to drive her to school. And they pay me very well, so, oh, she seems like she's struggling. And so she's going crazy. And then while this is all going on in my head, all of a sudden I'll hear her say, okay, I'm sorry I said that. It wasn't a great thing to say. So it's not even, I'm not even engaging, because there's no point in engaging. First of all, it will only, you know, boost her dopamine, that she's just trying to cope with life, and, you know, she trusts the parents, so they lash out at you. But try not to engage every single time, and then just forgive yourself and apologize. I always say, I'm just a girl who had kids. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm doing the best I can. And that, they take that as they'll accept that answer. It humanizes you. And so those are my tips.
I think that's great. Who else? We got one right there.
Do you have any tips on what parents can maybe say, or ways that they can, you know, deal with some of that in settings where they cannot share, or they, you know, boundaries prohibit sharing? What are some things that parents can just say to kind of get, you know, if it's an unsupportive school environment, if unsupportive any other environment, what can you say to somebody who might not be, you know, do you know what I'm saying? So like, your kids in juvie, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I would say if your school, I mean, this is another reason why I made the film, because this is what I would have done in 6th grade, 7th grade, when we were all being tortured, is organize a screening at your school, to go talk to your principal and say, I don't think there's enough education at this school about ADHD, and this is 10% of your population, so it's an important number that comes through every classroom, and I'd like to organize a screening for all the teachers and administrators and offer it to parents as well. I mean, that's one thing you have, is that the shame and the stigma around ADHD has to stop. You know, we're as parents feeling ashamed and stigmatized because of kids that will probably end up doing amazing things. I can already tell you, my son, who's turning 21, is brilliantly creative, and yeah, he can't, you know, clean his apartment, or, you know, he can't do the simple things. He's learning to do the simple things, but he can do the incredibly hard things. He can do the things that are, you know, conceptual expansion. Like, his brain works in an amazing way. As parents, you should not feel shamed or stigmatized because you may have the next Walt Disney living in your house. So I think we need to get to a point where we stop looking at it as a shameful thing, and I hope this film is the first step. But I would say, offer the film to people so they get another perspective.
I had a question over here.
Yeah. I'm a psychologist, I manage a substance use program. So I guess my question is sort of more for the providers on the panel, but I'll take any advice. But what I'm seeing is kind of like you on the end, I fell into learning about ADHD sort of secondarily to having a substance use and a trauma background. I just started seeing it more and then rabbit holed, and I am here tonight. My question is, I currently work for an FQHC, so we see a lot of folks who are uninsured, underinsured, and we are starting to build an ADHD clinic because we're seeing a need. A lot of that is sort of being propelled by the behavioral health department, But obviously we have to work in tandem with medical providers because we can't do the prescribing piece. We can do the testing piece. But my question is around advice. A lot of the frustrations are coming around working in a multidisciplinary setting where folks may have different training or different backgrounds that maybe aren't aligned with some of the views about ADHD that are presented in the film. So how do you, advice for how to work sort of more collaboratively, or for providers who might have outdated information, or be judging, particularly like my clients who might have fallen into substance use because of their vulnerabilities around being undiagnosed. A lot of the folks have incarceration histories, things that aren't actually related to accessing care. Like, you still deserve access to that care, but they're sort of being used to not do that in a biased way. So any kind of advice around that for us, like a behavioral health person trying to work collaboratively in an interdisciplinary setting?
My. That's a big question. I think that one's mine. You know, I would be curious what kind of continuing education opportunities can be made available. I think this film is a great opportunity, but I wonder about conversations and continuing education opportunities at your site that are collaborative and ongoing. I know that sounds like a simple solution, but bringing people along is a process, and it has to be something where folks are in conversation with one another and being exposed to the stories of the people in front of them. So I think you're up against it. I mean, I don't want to minimize how challenging it is, but I think at the end of the day, you're looking at a professional development issue.
Question? Another question? Oh, okay, we've got one there, and then we've got someone here. Keep your hand up so we know where you are. There she is. You see her? Yeah.
Hi, my question is probably a little bit of a different flavor, but I'm going to kick myself if I don't ask it. Do you still stay in touch with the families? Because in particular, I find myself very concerned for the boy who was sent to the alternative school, and like I'm going to be curious for weeks after this. So if you can speak to it, that's great. If not, I totally understand.
Honestly, I haven't not gotten in touch with everyone in a little while, but my guess is I've been asked that several times, that there should be an update because people want to know what happened to Hogan. But I think they're going to be fine. I mean, they have what they need to be successful, which is parents who are engaged and love them, you know, and are getting them through. So I think they're going to be all right with that. I can't answer the question. So net, I can't answer it.
We've got one more question here. This will be our last question of the evening.
My question is about the medication. I have a son who has ADHD, and now that he's a teen, I always thought I wouldn't medicate him, but along the lines of, is that going to make him more likely to have substance abuse? My pediatrician unfortunately passed away. So the new one, where do I go for somebody who's going to look at him as a whole? Does he need medicine? If he does, which is the right one? That kind of thing.
Sure, I'll take that. We have several studies now that prove that treatment of ADHD, adequate treatment of ADHD, will protect people, teens, from substance use. It's the dosages of medications that are used for treatment of ADHD. Those are not something that will cause addiction. Was that your question?
Who do I turn to?
Yeah. So the second part of the question was, who do you turn to? The pediatrician that you were looking, that another pediatrician would be a good starting point, but also look for a good child and adolescent psychiatrist, rather a child and adolescent psychiatrist. Sometimes there are long waiting lists, so what I recommend is to get in that line and start talking to your pediatrician while you're waiting for your turn for the child psychiatrist. Does that make sense? Thanks.
Just one note that it's one of the concerns I have on the topic of ADHD is that there is a severe shortage of ADHD specialists in the country and in the world. And there needs to be much more training for pediatricians because, as we saw in the film, and you probably all realize this, but Brianna Bear's mother cut that medication in half, and it's Concerta, which means Concerta is a time release medication. It would be like one of those long the 12-hour capsules, opening that up and trying to figure out what half of it is. You can't cut Concerta in half. So Bear was probably getting 8 hours of methylphenidate in one shot, which is why he was, catatonic. But so we need much more education for even pediatricians and primary care physicians, because in the absence of experts, they are going to have to be a first line of defense.
Yes. Well, I'm sorry, go right ahead.
In certain states, there are now phone lines for pediatricians where pediatricians can get access to child psychiatrist on their cases for ADHD or anxiety. One used to be there in Illinois. I don't know if it's still active, but that's something to tell your pediatrician to look into. Thanks.
Wow, we could be here like 6 more hours, right? We could just cater in, Someone got an American Express black card, we just order in and we'll just all sit here? No? All right. Well, I think we ought to thank our panel. Thank you all so much for just the information, just creating that safe space. I think it's so wonderful. I learned a lot. My adopted daughter, my 12-year-old daughter that I got her when she was 4, has ADHD and a myriad of other issues. And so it always helps for me, and some of the moms that we're talking to, some of the parents here, I feel you. That's why I said some of the things I said, because I know that, you're screaming and yelling at the top of your lungs at 6:30 in the morning. You're like, this isn't productive, and then you drop them off at school and you feel like a piece of, can I say it? Can I say the bad word? Is that okay? You feel like a piece of shit because you screamed at your kid, I know it. I've lived it. So I appreciate your realness. I appreciate your honesty. I appreciate the panel for sharing what they know. Remember the Disruptors.com, right? Disruptors Film, like I said, disruptorsfilm.com. That's where you want to go for a lot of the resources. Also, remember that this is being recorded. It's going to be sent out, so you'll be able to get information, see this again. If you forgot something, you can always go to the website for the Family Institute. Obviously, these very learned ladies are available always, and can direct you as well, and they've given us a lot of great information. So why don't we give them one more final round of applause, and applaud yourself. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Have a good evening.